Boca Chica's surroundings were covered in thick smoke on September 8th when SpaceX roared the Starship SN-24 to life during its 6-engine static fire test. Remember that the Starship's upper stage has up to 3 sea-level Raptor engines in the middle, which gimble to change the direction of the Starship to either left or right during flight. The upper stage Starship will also have 3 Raptor vacuum engines on the outer cylinder beneath it. These other engines will not gimbal, rather they are only designed to generate thrust. Welcome to another great episode today. We'll reveal how Elon Musk reacted as the Ship 24 TPS got damaged in an explosion that covered all over Boca Chica factory during its static fire test. To be a consistent and a successful entrepreneur, you must be a shock absorber. Elon Musk, the founder and CEO of SpaceX, has mastered how to absorb shock all these years. When the first era of Starship was manufactured, most of this, including the Falcon 9, failed during the test flight. To correct the failure and make amendments would take millions of dollars from Elon's pocket. Thus, spending on a project whose feasibility hasn't been mapped out is terrible and heartbreaking, since any failure will immediately remind you of how much your money is running down the drain. This is what brings shock to Elon Musk anytime any of the rocket's vehicles are being tested. You can relate more to the tense feelings. What happened on September 8th was not actually a failure of the entire Ship 24, but the thermal protection systems or TPS burnt and blew up, leading to fire test failure of the Ship 24 rocket. To remind you about the function of the thermal protection system, it is the barrier that protects the space shuttle orbiter during the searing 1650 degrees Celsius heat of atmospheric re-entry. A secondary goal is to protect from the heat and cold of space while in orbit. Perhaps Elon Musk developed a mountain of disappointment in his chest and thought something bad would happen during the fire test. His expectations were not totally wrong. Certainly, an unusual burning flame from Ship 24 engulfed all over the factory. Recall that the Starship's upper stage will only start firing up when it reaches the lower Earth orbit. What this means is that the super heavy booster only propels the upper stage Starship from Earth to pierce through and break the Earth's thick gravitational force and get into lower Earth orbit. From there, at an altitude, the Starship upper stage will take over by first disconnecting itself from the Super Heavy, fire up its engines, and fly to the Moon or Mars, while the Super Heavy returns to Earth and lands on the Mechazilla catcher or chopsticks. That is why the Super Heavy has 33 Raptors, so it could have enough thrust to fight against the G-force and win before getting into the LEO, and that is where its function ends. This is a huge engineering technique. Let's applaud SpaceX and Elon Musk for presenting this engineering concept to the world. Elon Musk and SpaceX have to test the 6 engines of the upper stage Starship to see how it'll start working when it gets to the low Earth orbit, a factor for which static fires are much more effective at destroying objects on the ground than on orbit. For a spacecraft to survive re-entry, thermal protection tiles are essential. A spacecraft will generate large amounts of heat during re-entry by converting its velocity into heat due to friction within the atmosphere. A blade of the heat shield will heat up and burn away, removing the energy, one technique to cope with the heat. Heat shields have the drawback of burning out and need to be replaced, which won't work if you want to relaunch a spacecraft within an hour of landing, as SpaceX eventually plans to do with Starship to enable fast reusability. To protect the spaceship from re-entry heat, Starship employs ceramic thermal protection tiles. The tiles are incredibly thin and delicate, much like the Space Shuttle. Each Starship contains about 25,000 thermal protection tiles, and it takes time to produce them. The black heat shield tiles on the Starship SN-24 are ready to protect it from the high temperatures it will face when it passes through Earth's atmosphere. During the static fire test, the Raptor's power shook the vehicle, which caused some tiles to fall off. A Twitter user who closely monitors Starship's development said almost 30 tiles are broken or missing on Ship 24 after an 8-second static fire test with 6 engines. Yes, we do static fires for a reason. It's better to mess up on the ground than on the way to space, Elon Musk replied. No public date has been set for Starship and Super Heavy's first attempt to fly into orbit. Even though the static fire test only lasted about 8 seconds, the Raptor's powerful thrust was enough to start a fire that spread to the nearby grass fields. You can imagine how powerful that could be. And their fierce animals could be burned, because along the sandy beach where the Starbase launch pad is, there is a US National Wildlife Refuge right next to it. Local firefighters were there in case SpaceX needed help putting out the fire. A NASA spaceflight livestream says that at first, the company let the grass fire go out on its own while they watched. As the fire grew taller and spread into the grass along State Highway, fire trucks went toward it to help put it out. Hence, Ship 24's first 6-engine test was not so lucky, although the Starship made it through seemingly unscathed. Most likely, 8 long seconds of blast furnace conditions melted the top layer of surrounding concrete and shot a hailstorm of tiny superheated globules in almost every direction. Indeed, something readily able to burn in almost every direction, and a fire started. In several locations to the south and west, brush caught fire. It began to burn, usually aggressively, quickly growing into walls of flames that sped across the terrain. To the east, debris made it to the SpaceX dumpster, the contents easily catching fire and burning for hours. Several brush fires were visible almost immediately after clouds of dust and steam cleared. More likely than not, the combination of extreme force, heat and burn duration likely obliterated the almost entirely unprotected concrete surface. SpaceX refuses to install substantial water deluge or flame deflection systems at Starbase's test stands and launch pads, even though constant evidence shows that systems would make all Starship static fire activities simpler and safer. The bush consumed by the fire-protected habitat was located in a state park and wildlife refuge. Although fire is natural and could harm the life of many habitats, especially aquatic habitats, including some of those found at Boca Chica. This is the second biggest brush fire caused by Starship testing since 2019, which may not be in the best interests of the area. When combating fires near Starbase, firefighters are often required to walk or even drive over protected wetlands and salt flats. This can impact the local animals and habitats, eventually comparable to the damage caused by the fire itself. The Programmatic Environmental Assessment (PEA) submitted by SpaceX to the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) gave the company the go-ahead with rocket engine fire test. Starbase Texas facilities and launch plans earlier this year, fire is only briefly mentioned a few times, and the FAA is only after protecting the life and property of any living animals, including humans living in Starbase, against any hazardous chemical pollution, not to talk of the fire burning. So, SpaceX has a lot to prove to the FAA that living bodies around the Starbase will be safe no matter whatever test they carry out. However, repairing and preventing future harm to wetlands has been mentioned dozens of times. It is one of the several conditions SpaceX must fulfill before the FAA can issue Starbase an orbital launch license. In the end, considering that the FAA allowed the PEA while being fully aware of the brush fire in 2019 that was sparked by Starhopper, an early Starship prototype, it is possible that this fire was just as severe as, or even worse. It may play a little part in the ongoing launch licensing procedure. Nonetheless, the likelihood of it being a showstopper is extremely low. It is likely that SpaceX would profit at least as much as the wildlife surrounding Boca Chica if it were able to implement adjustments that would prevent catastrophic brush fires from becoming a frequent occurrence that was deemed an accident. Starship SN24 will be propelled to orbit by Super Heavy Booster 7, which is equipped with 33 Raptor V2 engines. Engineers have tested both vehicles over the last couple of months to prepare for the long-awaited flight to orbit the planet and return. SpaceX plans to fly SN24 across the Florida Straits to space and land in the ocean near Hawaii. The booster is expected to return to the launch pad by a propulsive ocean landing, or SpaceX could attempt to catch the 230-foot-tall rocket with the launch tower's robotic arms. Do you think the next static fire test of the Starship's upper stage will be successful and won't end up burning? And talking about trials, Blue Origin BE-4 has failed and caused $1 million lost. Take a look into this just clicking on this video.